When thinking of the center Venn diagram between gaming technology and home construction, only one product falls reliably in the middle. It's both a handheld gaming device and reliable brick, all rolled into one to keep you equally entertained and probably as much protected from invaders and storms alike.
Suck brick, kid!
The Nintendo Game Boy. The idea was first conceived in the 1980s by Nintendo's R&D 1, the legendary team responsible for the Game & Watch system, led by Nintendo company man Yokoi Gunpei. Yokoi found inspiration while observing someone on a train attempting to entertain themselves with an LCD calculator. And let's face it, we've all been there. Okada Satoru would be Yokoi's right-hand man assisting in design and production of the system. However, the two would debate over whether their product with the working title DMG-01 should be more cost-effective, as Yokoi argued, or a technological powerhouse with a lighter frame and colored graphics, as Okada would argue. Yokoi would win out, claiming an expanded battery life would woo potential users voyaging on long trips. The device was a 8-bit system, a complete sturdy vertical reinforcement on a 2-inch display with a 160 by 144 pixel screen, offering a color shade I can only describe as a rich baby diarrhea grayish green. Familiar faces from the original Nintendo Entertainment System controller, such as the A, B, Start, Select, and Directional pad carried over here, including a headphone jack at the bottom, with a volume slider on one side and a contrast wheel on the other. Cartridge games would fit snugly in the back slot, but no backlight was included, so no playing in the dark. The most impressive feature of all, though, was the whopping 30 hours of battery life fueled by the power of 4 AA batteries. Beating other competitors like the Atari Lynx and the Sega Game Gear to the market in 1989, the DMG-01 moniker would fall and the name Game Boy would rise, proving itself the better option with an affordable $89.99 price tag and its soon-to-be extensive library of games. The safe bet launch title was to be a new adventure for everyone's favorite plumber, Mario, in Super Mario Land. However, the Game Boy's release was more notable for introducing the worldwide masses to everyone's favorite brick stacker, Tetris. Within 3 years, 32 million units would be sold, a step above Yokoi's predicted 25 million when first pitching the system, and by 1997, 60 million units would be sold. Some of the most memorable titles over the years included the likes of Kirby's Dream Land, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and Super Mario Land 2, The 6 Golden Coins. Later in 1996, the Game Boy would shake up its look with 2 new variants, the Game Boy Pocket, a slimmer and trimmer version of the original, and the only released in Japan Game Boy Light that came with an illuminated screen. There were a slew of accessories for the Game Boy that were released at this time, such as the Super Game Boy in 1994 that allowed you to play games on the Super Nintendo. Other devices included the Game Boy Pocket Sonar, Game Boy Camera and Printer, the Handy Boy, and the infamously rarely used link cable. Around this time, one product that shared branding with the Game Boy would not find as much success. In 1995, another project headed by Yokoi dropped on the public, the Virtual Boy, a tripod gaming device that displayed graphics so euphorically infrared that one might pass out from the sheer stimulus overload, leading to its quick and unfortunate cancellation. Around the Game Boy's 6th year of existence, excitement around the product began to wane. As Nintendo began to speculate if the Game Boy could continue on, one game took to the tides to serve Nintendo a lifeline. Pokemon Red and Green was released in 1996 to critical success in Japan, featuring that now iconic group of 150 original animal-like creatures. Initially gun-shy to release this product in America due to the lack of RPG interest in the US market, Nintendo finally came to their senses and in 1998 dropped Pokemon on the American public, breathing new life into the Game Boy's longevity. But more importantly, Pokemon's popularity meant the iron was hot for an update in the Game Boy's hardware. So Nintendo struck quickly, serving up the Game Boy Color in 1998, which was lighter than its predecessor, had more processing power, included backward game compatibility, was double the speed than the original Game Boy, as well as quadruple the memory, and of course, color graphics. The Pokemon craze would continue with Pokemon Gold and Silver in 2000, alongside a handful of other third-party titles that would release on the Game Boy Color. Some of the accessories released for the device included a mobile adapter and the Boombox Boy. By 2003, the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color would finally reach their end, closing out the classic Game Boy era with a whopping 118 million units sold. But by this point, a new device had now taken the reins. After Yokoi tragically passed away in a car accident in 1997 following his departure from Nintendo due to his involvement and the subsequent failure of the Virtual Boy, the next generation of Game Boy would be spearheaded by Okada, who would turn the world and the Game Boy on its side. The Game Boy Advance dropped in 2001, no longer sporting a portrait vertical view, everything now was landscape horizontal. With a 32-bit power upgrade and a $99.99 price tag, the device would debut with 15 launch titles, more buttons, an LCD display, and thousands of colors. The Game Boy Advance, or GBA for short, would be in development for years during the 90s, and fortunately was given the time to fine-tune all of its properties while the Game Boy Color and the Pokemon Rage acted as a stopgap. The variants for the GBA included the Game Boy Advance SP, a clam-shaped version that would later resemble the two-piece flip frame of the Nintendo DS and 3DS, and the Game Boy Advance Micro, a very tiny version of the GBA. 81 million units of the Game Boy Advance would be sold. By the end of 2003, development on the Nintendo DS had begun production. Initially, it was meant to be a third pillar alongside the main Nintendo consoles and the Game Boy, but its massive success was so big that it would retire the Game Boy line altogether and become the face of Nintendo's handheld division. Nonetheless, the spirit of the Game Boy lived on in all of Nintendo's future products, including the 3DS and the Wii U's very memorable wonky tablet. That's the best description I've got. In 2017, Nintendo finally brought together the Nintendo main console and the Nintendo handheld into one long-awaited prodigal son, the Nintendo Switch. Something that would never exist without the dream that the Game Boy achieved. All in all, 1,046 titles were released on the Game Boy, which is just an insane number, but it only goes to prove how long this system was around and how popular it was. So sleep well, sweet Prince Game Boy. You're now in a better place with far worse products. Help me with the housekeeping. Please like the video. Tell me all of your favorite Game Boy memories in the comments below. Subscribe and please don't litter.